Imagine a land once steeped in poverty and hardship, now on the brink of becoming the world's richest country. This isn't a fairy tale, but the real story of Ireland. Let's take a step back in time, when Ireland was primarily an agricultural society. The Emerald Isle, as it was fondly known, was a picturesque landscape of rolling green fields and quaint rustic villages. Yet beneath this serene facade lay a stark reality. The economy was heavily reliant on farming, and industrialization was a distant dream. This was a land where the people toiled from dawn till dusk, their hands calloused from hard labor, their faces etched with the lines of struggle. The Irish people, renowned for their resilience and spirit, faced their hardships with courage and determination. Their lives were simple, their needs were basic, but their dreams were big. They envisaged a future where they could break free from the chains of poverty and create a prosperous nation that their children could be proud of. But the journey was not easy. The lack of industrialization meant fewer job opportunities. The dependence on agriculture made the economy vulnerable to the whims of nature. Droughts, floods, and crop failures were common, often plunging the country into periods of severe economic distress. But amidst these trials and tribulations, something was brewing. A transformation was on the horizon, a change that would not only uplift the economy, but also alter the very fabric of Irish society. As the sun set on the agricultural era, the seeds of a new revolution were being sown. A revolution that would see Ireland transition from a land of farmers to a hub of high-tech industries. A revolution that would catapult this small island nation onto the global stage as one of the world's wealthiest countries. But how did this drastic transformation occur? Buckle up as we delve into the intriguing journey of Ireland's economic revolution. The dawn of the 1990s brought with it the winds of change for Ireland. This era marked a turning point, a transformative period that would reshape the country's economic landscape forever. During the early 1990s, Ireland was still largely recognized as an agricultural country, steeped in tradition and reliant on the land. But beneath the surface, something was stirring. A vision was taking shape, a vision of a modern, prosperous Ireland that could stand tall among the world's leading economies. The government of Ireland, recognizing the potential for change, began to shift its focus. A strategic decision was made to invest heavily in two key areas: technology and education. With a clear vision and a determined mindset, they set out to transform Ireland from a traditional agricultural society into a vibrant, high-tech hub. The government's efforts to invest in education were nothing short of remarkable. Schools and universities were equipped with the latest technology, and a strong emphasis was placed on science, technology, engineering, and math, the so-called STEM subjects. This investment in education, coupled with a young dynamic population, set the stage for a wave of innovation and growth. But education was only a part of the equation. To truly become a high-tech hub, Ireland needed to attract foreign investment, and attract it did. With a favorable business environment, competitive corporate tax rates, and a highly educated workforce, Ireland soon became a magnet for some of the world's biggest tech companies. Giants like Google, Facebook, and Apple set up their European headquarters in Ireland, creating thousands of jobs and pumping billions into the economy. The 1990s were indeed a time of change for Ireland, a time when a small agricultural country began to dream big and take the first steps towards becoming a global tech powerhouse. But as remarkable as this period was, it was only a prelude. This was only the beginning of a remarkable transformation that was yet to unfold. With the turn of the millennium, Ireland was ready to step into the limelight. As the world was embracing the digital age, Ireland was not to be left behind. It was not just the luck of the Irish that attracted big tech giants like Google, Apple, and Facebook to its shores. It was a calculated move, a strategic decision that would forever change the economic landscape of the Emerald Isle. The arrival of these tech behemoths was more than just an influx of foreign investment. It was a seismic shift that sent ripples through the economy. Suddenly, Ireland was not just exporting goods, it was exporting ideas. It was not just about potatoes anymore, it was about pixels. The tech boom was here, and it was here to stay. This was not a one-sided affair. Ireland had something to offer too. A young, educated workforce ready to take on the challenges of the digital age. An attractive tax regime that made it an ideal destination for multinational corporations. And a government that was ready to embrace the future with open arms. The impact was immediate and profound. Job opportunities surged. The unemployment rate plummeted. The gross domestic product, or GDP, witnessed a steep ascent. The economy was booming, and so was the confidence of the Irish people. They were no longer just surviving, they were thriving. But the transformation was not just economic, it was cultural too. Ireland was becoming a hub for innovation and technology, the Silicon Valley of Europe, if you will. The tech boom was reshaping the Irish identity. The land known for its lush green pastures and enchanting folklore was now also known for its cutting-edge technology and entrepreneurial spirit. The tech boom did not just bring prosperity, it brought a sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment. It brought a new narrative, a new identity. Ireland was no longer just a small island nation on the edge of Europe. It was a global player, a force to be reckoned with. From a land of green pastures, Ireland had evolved into a land of silicon dreams. Today, Ireland stands on the precipice of a new title, the world's richest country. Once a modest agricultural nation, it is now a dynamic high-tech hub with a thriving economy. In recent years, Ireland has seen a remarkable surge in growth, outpacing even the most industrious of nations. This economic renaissance is fueled by several factors. Firstly, a young, educated workforce eager to innovate and excel. Secondly, attractive corporate tax rates have drawn in global tech giants, creating a ripple effect of prosperity. Thirdly, strategic investments in education and infrastructure have laid a solid foundation for sustained growth. But it's not just about the numbers. It's also about a resilient spirit, a determination to rise above challenges and seize opportunities. This is the story of Ireland's economic transformation, a testament to the power of vision, strategy, and hard work. As we marvel at this extraordinary transformation, one can't help but wonder, what's next for Ireland? Ireland's journey from rags to riches is nothing short of a miracle. This transformation tale, from a modest agricultural nation to a thriving tech hub, is a testament to the power of resilience and innovation. As we look ahead, imagine the boundless potential that the Emerald Isle holds. Are we witnessing the rise of the world's richest country? Only time will tell. To stay updated on more such incredible stories from around the globe, hit that subscribe button and join us on this enlightening journey.